Welcome back to Project Frankaru. It's time to get this motor standing on some motor mounts instead of hanging from my fixture up there. So in order to do that, we've got to build a cross member to go in here. The cross member is going to be made out of 1 3/4 inch .109 wall tubing. Same material that's used to make roll cages and chassis on race cars. And we're talking race cars, so this is strong enough, no problem there. So the thing to do is to draw up this tube to go across underneath here. Before I do that though, I have to determine where is the motor mount going to sit. These are ICT billet motor mounts and they are adjustable. They've got bolts here and multiple holes in the adapter plate on the motor that they can be moved forward or backward, either way. And so I'll determine where it needs to go. I started out dead center and started measuring everything. I don't want to come forward too much and interfere with my dry sump pickup points. I don't want to move back too much and get in the way of my remote oil filter pickup here. So I want to go between those two. Also, I need room up front for things like the dry sump pump on the driver's side. So being symmetrical, I want to make sure I keep room for all of those. Also looking out for any kind of electrical hookup points or anything here that I might interfere with. And as it turns out, oddly enough, dead center on that mount seems to be just right. Also, if you move it further back, the problem you have is you're putting more weight on that. You're getting more of the transmission weight, more overhung weight. Don't really want to do that. So this is a really nice place. Doesn't seem to interfere with things. Looks good. That's where I'm going to take a gamble on it. So the first thing I have to do is get some measurements. And the first measurement is the width of the oil pan. Now it tucks up on this driver's side, but I don't want to do that because I want my bar to be symmetrical. So just from this side to this side on the bottom of the pan, that's 9 inches. The next measurement then is going through the center line of these mounts up to the frame rails. How wide is the distance between there? Well, I just take my handy dandy big square here, put it against the frame rail square in the bottom of the pan, and go to a mark right between the mounts. Take a measurement, flip it around, do the other side, add them together. That's my distance, okay? And it is going to be centered, but right now I can measure from side to side. I'm centered between my mounts and my frame rails, so I know that. No problem. Furthermore, these mounts are going to get welded later to this bar, so if there were any difference, I can make it up there. So that's my distance. The next distance I have to be concerned about is how much of a drop. I'm going to be coming 1/4 inch below this pan, very close with my bar. Now you can do a weld-in or a bolt-in bar. If you're going to do a bolt-in, you might want that if you're going to do something that has a dry or a pump that's hanging on a wet sump, it's hanging down, and you have to get it forward to get the engine out or something. That case, you probably want a bolt-in motor mount to get it out of the way. Because of the fact this is flat on the bottom, my bar is going to be sitting right underneath it, and I have a whole lot of room above this transmission. Before I hit the tunnel, I can raise this up, pull it forward, no problem. So a weld-in is better that way. If you do a bolt-in, you also need to remember these frame rails are not very strong. They're just stamped sheet metal, so what you have to do is drill a larger hole, put a sleeve in, weld it on each side so you don't crush the frame rail when you bolt it. Now, in that case, if you do a bolt-in, you can only either come up from the bottom with an L or across the top down. And you can't wrap around the frame rail. I want to wrap around the frame rail. And I'm going to be making a piece to do that, to reinforce that, out of 10 gauge. And that's about 1/8 inch material. So that will wrap around the frame rail and get welded all the way around, distribute the load, and my bar will get welded to that, so I've got enough strength not to be breaking that frame rail eventually. It's a extra plate. But anyway, so one of the things I'm looking at is that frame rail gets wider to the front on each side. It gets a little wider, and so at the back here, it's about 3 1/4. At the front, it's 4 1/4. My length on that, looking at the width between the plates and all here, little engineering mind, 5 inches looks good. That's what I'm going to go with. So we'll make C-caps to go on that. So where I'm going to measure to for the drop is to the top of that frame rail, not the bottom because it's angled. And to do that, same thing again. Just put this up against the bottom of the oil pan and go to the top, take a measurement, check both sides, make sure I'm even. And that turns out to be 10 3/4. So an 11-inch drop to the center is what I'm going to do. So the other thing is I could bring that tube into the bottom or to the center of the rail. I'm going to go to the center because of the fact that I'll be cutting at a more steep angle on the tube that way, exposing more end tubing, spreading the load out with a longer weld. So that will spread the load out to that tube. So we'll transfer those dimensions to CAD, and you can use a cheap CAD, any CAD will do it, and figure out what we need as far as the angles. The tube radius, the bend radius on the tubing is to the center line of the tubing, and my friend Brad told me that he has two dies, a 4-inch and a 5-inch. So to the center line of the tube, it's a 4-inch radius. Keep that in mind. We'll start our bend right at the edge of the pan here and come up evenly on both sides. While I'm at it, there's another something I need to do, and that is back here, in the back here, this is the lower suspension arm mount, A-arm mount, and it's connected to the frame up here. And as you recall, I cut this completely off. This old cross member, there's no crossover right now, nothing to support it in between. So while this is supported up and down by that in and out, it is going to eventually want to crack and break. There's not enough strength here to hold it side to side. So I have to tie one side to the other side. And I need to run something across between there. Well, our tubing is very nice for that. Furthermore, there's a pocket right here between the adapter plate and the front of the transmission where the steering rack used to go, and that's going to fit me right where I need to put it. It's just behind the clutch. It's going to be a great place to make it even with the bottom of this, and I can put a tabs on here to mount my skid plate. Same up here, tabs for the skid plate and up to the front. So the bar will support the skid plate. This will fit in here. The next thing I need to know is what kind of angle I need up here, and to do that, I can use my handy dandy little angle finder, ballpark something right away back here, and what I get, do it on this side so you can see, what I get here coming in square to that there is about 20 degrees right there is where I'm at. So I figured that in 6 inches across here, bend up 20 degrees, and so I'll lay that out on the CAD as well. Problem here is this is really a funny angle. It's a compound angle trying to weld to this. And I don't really want to do that, and I don't need this chunk here that's two pieces sandwiched together. This is hollow inside. There's nothing in there. So there's nothing I have to worry about running into. So what I did on this side is I already modified it. Let me kick you over here a little bit. And on this side, I took my Sawzall so I could stay parallel with the car lengthwise, but at my angle here, my 20-degree angle, and just inside where this starts to roll over, cut it across, and then hit it with a grinder to flatten these together so I have a nice flat surface here. I'm going to put a 10-gauge plate on there that the tube is going to butt up against and get welded to. So that's going to connect these lower control arms together and re-strengthen all of this. The next thing that goes with this is steering. I do have to deal with that. This pocket is where the steering rack sits. The steering assembly has to bolt up to that. You can't go underneath it. It has to go above. That's the way the factory did it too. So that piece of bar that's going to attach to needs to be pretty stout. And so what I'm planning on doing is using a single thickness 1/4 inch by 2.5 and bend it up into a mustache bar here and down, brace it on the ends, and then that will act as my steering rack support. And also tie these together out here. That'll helpful. One of the things that was here and is not anymore and is on this side is the old sway bar mount. I don't know that I'm even going to run a sway bar mount on the front. These cars push enough. Adding more just makes it worse. I do have to remove this little pocket in here that was put in by the last owner because when you put a turbo car in a non-turbo engine, it happens that you have to put this pocket for the exhaust. So I'm going to get rid of that, flatten that out like this side, and tie these together and all. So that's all part of what I'm up to right now. So the next thing to do is to go up on CAD, take my dimensions, transfer them, get a drawing together to send over to Brad and say, please bend me up this tube. And when I come back, I'll be able to put all my plates in, tack everything in place, get these mounts bent in a little bit to tack to my tube, and these will get boxed in later completely so that we don't get dirt up inside them and all, and strengthen them. So the next thing is to go take a look at CAD. Okay, so here's my CAD layout. What I have in red here is the oil pan right here, 9 inches wide. I've got my frame rails up here on each side in red, and that is where everything has to go in between. So I drop down a 1/4 inch below the oil pan and do my 1 3/4 tube, 9 inches long, go to the center line of the tube right here and make a 4-inch radius bend, and I tangent that to the center of this side rail here. This line coming down intersects there, and I just transfer to each side, and there I've got my tubing attached to my frame rail. And I've got my drop, I've got my radius, and my angle turns out to be 44 degrees. Just about 45 degrees, but it's 44. And I got 33 inches between the rails. So, now if I take that drawing, modify it ever so slightly here, and I square off the ends of the tube, that is what my friend can make for me. And so he just needs this length on each leg, and in the center, and the radius, and the angle. This length can be longer, and I can cut it back anyway because I'm going to have to do that. On the side of the tubing there, these are my little C channels that are going to go over the frame rails. They're 10 gauge. They will be bent left and right. So while this is only one side, got to remember to bend them opposite each other. Otherwise, no go. So this has an 1/8 inch bend radius in the corners, 10 gauge, 3 1/4 at the back, 4 1/4 at the front, 5 inches long, and that is going to be my little C channel. I've got a couple more pieces of gusset and flat plate that I need, and then this is my rear cross member, and there I have my 20-degree angle. I've got my 4-inch radius, and I give him these dimensions, and lo and behold, he can build me this tube. So that's what we give to Brad, and see where it goes from there. Hi. Well, there's been a bit of a delay. It's been a while since I was able to get these parts ordered and all, and we've had a race in between, and I had to wait for the parts to be made. But today I got a phone call saying, hey, the tubes are done. So we've got our engine cradle tube here, and we have our cross member tube for the suspension, so I can move on. In addition, we've got a couple other things. Maybe a couple sets of the brackets, the frame reinforcement brackets that are going to go over the frame rails to give me something to weld to for the cross members. And he actually made me 2 sets, and I'm sure glad he did. When I went to put them on, they were a little tight. They were a lot tight, and I had some dimensional issues here. It wasn't quite wide enough, and I was going to have to heat them and bend them, and didn't really want to. I'm a compressor. Didn't really want to do that. So because of that, I decided to modify them slightly. So rather than go around the frame, I could either cut off the bottom lip or the top lip. Considering the weight is hanging down, I decided to do away with the bottom lip, but keep the top lip. These are 1/8 inch thick, pretty strong, and so that's what it looks like without. So right there, I've got modified ones, and they go right over the frame. I'll show you that in a moment. So the part I cut off is actually going to be useful for another thing I have to do. So let me move the camera and show you a little bit of what's going on here, okay? So down in here, I've marked around where this is going, and I've cleaned the paint on the outside of where it's going to get welded. I really don't like the fact that many of these places just weld up things and allow them to rust. This is all going to get painted and cleaned up. As a matter of fact, on the back side of these parts and wherever I've cleaned away that I don't need to, I'm going to go ahead and paint that with some special zinc paint, a weld-through paint, so that it will actually prevent this from rusting. When you have 2 pieces of metal together like that, water, moisture gets in there, it's going to rust. So to prevent that, I will treat that with the weld-through paint, the high zinc, and then clamp them in place. And everything's going to get tack welded right now until such time as I get the motor out and I can just weld everything and paint everything. In the meantime, the next step is going to be to get these welded in and then cut the tube. Cutting the tube is going to be very tricky. I noticed here, and you can see from the frame rail here, it doesn't actually run parallel with the car. It actually extends out a little at the front, so they diverge. That means I'm going to have a compound angle here on that tube, and that's going to be real fun to figure out. So the idea is to go ahead and cut the tube a little wide. My 33-inch measurement does not include the 1/8 inch on each side for this plate, so that will get narrower by 1/8 or 1/4 overall. And I can just grind slowly and keep fitting and grinding and fitting and grinding until it slides in here where I need it. So it's going to be a slow process. I'll show you a little bit more of the setup on that and marking the tube next, okay? So the next thing I have to do is I have to lay out where these plates match up with the tube. In other words, I have to mark the tube where I'm going to cut it on the ends. And to do that, I need to get a more precise measurement from side to side here. And we know they lean out a little bit to the front. But I need to get between these motor mounts and get up here and come up with a template to be able to use to measure that. Well, the easy way to do that, I'm going to show you a little trick. I take two framing squares like this, and it's straight up on each side. So I put them up inside here, right in the middle where the tubes go, and I run it up to the oil pan, flat on the bottom of the oil pan, since I have leveled this to the car, and go from side to side and get these to touch on each side. Then I clamp them together at the bottom like this, and I have a template. Now let me show you how to transfer that into the tube. So here's my tube, and here is my template. Now when the tube was made, I told them to make the ends a little longer than required, that I could cut them off, but they're not necessarily the same on each side as far as the length of the ends. As a matter of fact, they're not. So because of that, I don't want to go ahead and try to center this up on that. I need to go ahead and center the bottom of this tube to the bottom of this jig. And to do that, what I did is I took a look at the distance from here to here. I've got 22.5 plus 7 and a 16th, and I take that, add them together, divide by 2, and put a mark on here. Or I can mark on the outside. I needed it on the inside here because I'm lining it up on the tube. On the tube, I measured from the beginning of the bend here to here, and it's 8 inches. I had told him I need 9 at the beginning of the bend, but his die has a 1/2 inch of overlap before the bend starts. But that's okay, doesn't matter. As long as I start right at this line that's pretty obvious where the bend starts on each side, measure on that and put a mark right down the center here. I then take my template, lay it on top, right on that line, and then to position it here, I can take a T-square or this little piece of very precision metal and put it up against it, touching on each side, and lining up my 2 marks. Now, all I have to do is mark on each side, and I'll show you that momentarily. Let me move the camera. Okay, to mark the tube, all I have to do is go right along the edge here and put a little line on here as to where I'm going to cut. Now, to transfer that down the sides, I could stand over here, look straight down, and try to put a line down. It can be a little messy to get this angle right, but to get it straight, because I'm parallel with this here, is just use a flashlight. Shine a flashlight down and get the shadow. Follow the edge of the shadow down the side of the tube on each side from straight above, and you have your cut line. And to cut it, what I'm going to do is use bandsaw. Now, I could cut that with a cutoff wheel, but when you get to the bottom side, trying to follow that around can be tricky. However, if you just put it on a vertical bandsaw, or my horizontal turned up vertical, I can cut on that line. I'm going to cut just a little to the outside of that line because I know it opens up a little bit. And so by cutting a little to the outside, I'm going to be grinding back. So there's going to be an iterative process here of grinding and fitting and grinding and fitting to get this to properly go up in there. Once it fits between the two motor mounts perfectly, right in dead center, then I know I'm forward and back correctly, and I will put a spacer on top of here, 1/4 inch between that and the oil pan, out of a piece of angle, 1/4 inch thick, and that will position me vertically, and I can tack weld this thing in. So the next thing is to cut these both ends off, go ahead and start fitting and grinding. I'll save you all that. Once I have it ground enough and fitted enough, I will come back when I'm ready to go ahead and weld it in. So the bar is now tack welded in place. And you can see these motor mounts are wider than the tube. So what I have to do is bend these in to meet the tube. They need to be shortened just a little. I'll mark one and cut them all the same so they hit tangent on the tube. And then I'm going to bend them up here just behind where the pivot is, where this mount is, so I don't get in the way, and just kick them in about 10 degrees. And that'll be a little bit of just a little on each one. I will test fit them, and I'll show you how I'm going to bend those momentarily. Okay, bending time. So I've got these plates. These are 1/4 inch thick motor mount plates, ears, and I have to bend them on the line here. I went ahead and scribed the line here behind the motor mount where it fits, drop down about 3/16. That's going to be my bend line. I don't want to bend up here where the rubber is. And I'm not going to bend far, just a little bit. Now, I'm not a big fan of putting metal in a vise and beating it with a hammer, especially when I don't have to. And it doesn't do a great job. Something this thick, that's a real problem. So what I have is a little device here in my shop press that is made for using in a vise. just two halves, a V-notch and this, and this is magnetically held in place. These were originally designed, like I said, for a vise. They work in here. They've seen a lot of use over the years, that's for sure. And I have put them to a lot of work. They are really nice. You can get bigger things. This just happens to be something I have around, and I like them. It was an old Harbor Freight thing. So what I do is put them in here, it's magnetically set, lower it down until I bottom out in my V, make sure that I'm centered up good. It'll self-center itself. Make sure I look good here, and back it off. Any adjustments, just to get it dead center. Come here, there we go. Okay, now I just line this up, and I will get it in the middle and give that a little bend. Sorry for the poor lighting over here. I'm trying to give you a little something to see with. So once I get there, I don't need a lot. This isn't going to take a tremendous amount. About 10 degrees. It'll be iterative. If I overbend it, I can actually use the press to bend it back. Not looking to do that though. So I'm just going to give it a little here until I get a little bend in it. There we go. It's giving. And we'll see if that's enough. Okay? And then I'll just repeat this process as necessary until I get the proper amount of bend. It's easy to get back on your line once you've done it, so that's easy. So once I get all of these bent, I can bolt them in and then tack weld them to the bar down below. When I get all done with all of the cross members and things, the motor's going to come out. When the motor comes out, I will full weld all these things, and these will get boxed in. So I'll take a piece of 1/8 inch plate and run it on the side here between the two plates, and then put a plate across the top to close it in, because otherwise it will just fill up with mud and dirt, which is bound to happen and encourage the rust monster, and we don't like the rust monster, so we're going to close that in. Anyway, so this will get me to the next step where I can actually get the motor supported on these mounts. Be back shortly. And behold, motor mounts are tack welded into place. So like I said, they'll get full welded and boxed in later. I can now remove the support that's been holding the engine up all the time from on top, which will allow me to put the hood on and check fit later on a lot of things which I've already been working on. So that will be very helpful. The next thing I'm going to be working on is going to be, and I'm going to move the camera a little here, is going to be the cross member that goes back here between the control arm supports. So that's what I'm going to start on next. Sit tight. As I mentioned earlier, the next thing to go in is going to be this cross member support that's going to go between the lower control arm supports back here to recreate this cross member. This is going to sit up in here about like that. The bottom of this needs to be about flush with the bottom of this adapter plate. The cross member will attach on each side here to a plate, and I'm going to need to box these in where I had cut off the old side. So the next thing to do is to go ahead and weld these plates on and grind the corners down and go ahead and make myself a mounting surface. And then this tube will attach directly to that, will butt into that plate. So I'll have to do a recreation of what I did up front here somewhat. But so first thing is get these 1/8 inch thick plates on here, and then cut this to fit and weld it in just like I did up front on the engine cross member. This has to sit in this slotted area right behind here because it will fit in here without hitting the flywheel and everything. I need to leave myself just a little bit of room. I don't want it to contact because it'll transmit vibration and all. Sorry for the banging there. Anyway, so that's next. So now I'm going to go ahead and get these put on here and grind the corners down. Okay, since I last saw you and while you were out, I've added a couple things. I boxed in these plates on each side. I've added just a 1/8 inch thick flat plate and closed that up, welded it all the way around, and put these back up. So these are now ready to be welded across between here with my cross member. To do that, I need another template. And I did a similar thing to last time, but a little different. So again, I use my two squares. I put them up inside here, and I get them to sit flush against each of these mounts, clamp it. Then I put a cross piece here flush with the bottom of this and the same distance up on each side, and I make sure I'm pivoting from the center here, and I clamp it. So this is the bottom of my tube and these are my ends. So now I lay this on the tube and mark it, and I can go ahead and cut it just like I did before. Okay, Cutting myself off a lot on these videos because more interested in the work than me. Anyway, so lay this out on the table again, center my tube on my marks, center this between here, marking it, and I can mark the ends underneath and over here, and I can use my shadow technique if I want, put my mark around each end of the tube and cut these off. These almost cut square to the tube. I'm just a little off on the angle of that 20 degrees, but it's very slight. And again, if I cut on my longest section and then grind it back, that's going to work best. So just start out at the furthest out point, cut off a little bit, grind it and fit it as it goes up in until it fits flush to the bottom. Here is at the bottom of the engine adapter plate, and I should be good to go ahead and tack weld this guy in. And then it's on to the steering mount. It's time to figure out how to mount this rack. I already know what I'm going to do. The idea here is it's going to sit up in this pocket with the oil pan we created and aim right at the steering shaft up there, just left of the exhaust. And the center line of this rack is right where it widens out here, and I put that in the center line of my pan. That means that my mount has got to be here and the same over here. This has a square, which is going to get leaned back a little. I'll have to make a wedge block. But the idea is that you put a clamp around that and it holds it up, bolts up into my plate. And on this side, I'll take a piece of billet material, bore a hole in it, drill my holes for my bolts, and then slice it in half to make a clamp. And that will go right on this side over here. So when this sits up in here, this can rotate on a clamp, get it in position, and then I can make my other clamp over here to hold this side. Now, to do that, I need a pretty stout piece of material. Happen to have a piece of 1/4 inch plate that we cut 2.5 inches wide. It'll sit right in here. It's not going to touch the pan. I have to be down enough to clear it so it doesn't touch it. Probably 1/4 inch again, 3/16 to 1/4. So that's going to sit right there. And then what I'm going to do is bend it up over here, up that way and back over in a Z shape on each side, and lay it on top of this mount up here that I just finished welding the bar to. And that'll capture the front of it and tie it together. And then I can gusset that on the ends when I'm all done and take this out. So I'll need to bend this in a Z. So now the question is, well, how much of an angle? Well, I happen to have a handy little device here. This is very useful. So I can adjust this in any direction I want, in and out, to find my angle. I can use this as my bending template. I can put it up on here and figure out an angle. So we know I've got to come over a bit before I go up. So I'm going to have to see how much I got to come over. I need to come over a good 2 inches past the end of this. That's what was sticking out there. So if I come over 2 inches past the end of that, start my bend here, or wherever this happens to fall, and then I'll leave my Z coming back. So at the moment, leave myself a little room up top here to bend back and hang over. If I bend it too much, it'll hang down too much, and I can just unbend, but probably start with not enough bend. It'll be up tight, and then just bend a little more here and a little more up there. That will make the Z a little bit deeper, getting it to the point where I have my clearance under here. So that's the next thing to do, is go ahead and get my angles figured here just right. Probably lay a few things in here, and then I will check the other side the same way. Make sure that that's going to work over here. A lot more room on this side, so I'll use this side as my guide side. When the plate's in, then it will get drilled and tapped for bolts, which will then lock the steering rack into place, and then I can hook up my steering shaft. I'll have to lengthen that. So that's the next step. And I'll be bending that on my little handy hydraulic press jig that I used earlier to bend the motor mounts. Same way, same thing, works like a champ. Not sure how clearly you'll be able to see this, but my bar here, I went ahead and center lined it and marked my pan, which is 8 inches back there, exactly side to side. And that's what I have to start my bend outside of that. Looking at this rack, I have to come up inside this rack at an angle that clears this piece right here, this casting, or it's going to be very close. So I want to make it just clear that. So my bend angle needs to come up and start right here at this outside edge here, or right in the center of this. And from here to here, is 1 3/4 hook puts me right at the edge of the pan. This, when I put it up in there, just barely hooks past the edge of the pan. So if I go 1 3/4 from the edge of the pan to here on both sides and do my bend up at that angle needs to be, checking it with this, at 115 degrees. So that's going to be my template angle on both sides. And so I'm going to put a mark here, 1 3/4, 1 3/4 past that mark. And I'll do that on both sides. Just come over 5, go to 6 3/4. There we go. And that's going to be my bend line that I will use to bend to that matching angle. So when I bend it up, this right here, this dashed line, that is going to be my bend line. Do the same over here and get it in the press. There we go. The next thing I have to do is get my bend back location and angle. I've got my bar bent here. I'm going to set it up in here with a spacer, 3/16 on top of it, underneath the oil pan. And I've center lined my pan and the edge of my pan. And if you're like me, and I hope you're not, I never have enough hands. So I'm going to use a little stand here that I'm going to adjust up to push up on that and hold it in place while I do my marking. So bear with me momentarily here. There we go. Okay, so now that's holding. Bring it over. And just a little more up. Come on. There we go. Gotcha. Okay, now that's held up in place. Pull it forward all the way against the front here, so I have a good solid point of holding things in place. And now that I have that, still not tight enough. Gotta get it good and snug up against that oil pan. There we go. Okay. Nope. There. That's the ticket. Get it flush to the edge of the pan here and here. That means I'm centered. Okay, now it's in place and I have to get my bend back location. To do that, the first thing I want to do is figure out exactly where it's going to be. So I'll take a little piece of plate, sit it on top of the mount, and push it over until it touches my bracket. Put a line. And then do the same on the other side. And then to get my angle, I just take my little finder here, put it up against here, and the bottom of this, and find my angle there. I've got it set. And that's going to be my bend angle and location. So I'll just repeat this on the other side, and away we go. Okay, at the end of the day, this is what our little Z-bar looks like. And I've got all my angles bent. I can set it up in here and test fit it, make sure it's good. And center it on the pan, center it front to back. There we go. I just need to weld that in. And then I'll have to add reinforcement gussets across the sides here, maybe a little more across the top, and make that nice and strong when I drop this cradle out, weld that all up. So that's going to be my mount for the steering rack. So that's going to be it. I'll weld that up, and that's going to be it for this episode. Next episode, I will be mounting the rack and working on steering. It's the real bugaboo of the whole project. So anyway, saving that for next time. Thanks for watching. Come on back.